endeavors in the past. What I'd like to do is spend the next 20 minutes or so telling you a little bit about the Western GTA Summit. I've got a couple of pictures up here that you can see to start with. It was an incredible day. We had over 500 people from all different sectors of society, business, government, not-for-profit, labor, etc. And we had three topics. The first topic was, how are we going to move in the Western GTA in the 21st century? And we started with John Tory give us a real interesting address where he said this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build the kind of transit that we want to have in the Western GTA. And we either have to make it or we're going to end up regretting the decision. It was a real call to action presentation. We had Minister Murray, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, come, and he was interesting because he said economic development needs transit. And so when you think about the kind of city that you want to build, think about the role that transit plays. Think about how important Pearson Airport is to Mississauga and Brampton, and think about how important the 400 series of highways. That's how important transit could or won't be, depending on whether you build it or not, to economic development in the Western GTA in the future. We had the CEO of Metrolinx and the CEO of Pearson Airport. Fascinating presentations. We had actually 8 mayors, the 7 mayors of all of the cities and towns in Peel and Halton, as well as the mayor of Barrie, come and give a presentation. And we had an incredible panel representing numerous different sectors of society, talking about both live and thrive. And on the live panel we had planners from Toronto, from Mississauga, from Brampton, and from the Canadian Urban Institute talking about what kind of a city that we want to live in. And on the thrive panel we had people from the United Way, from UTM and Sheridan, from Peel Poverty Action Group, from Labour, talking about how do we create the opportunities that we want to live in Mississauga, Brampton, the Western GTA in the future. So you may ask yourself, why do we have to have a Western GTA Summit? The reasons were a few things. Number one, the Mississauga Summit, which has been operational since 2007, felt frustrated that on the big issue of transit that's been going on within the Toronto area in the last little while, we get drowned out by what goes on in Toronto, whether it's a video that we were talking about at lunch that takes over the news, or whether it's whatever transit plan on Shepherd or on Scarborough certain councillors in Toronto want, we get drowned out. And so we said we wanted to make sure, not that we dominate the conversation, but we have a role in that conversation. And we said, you know what, just Mississauga alone may not be able to do it. So we went and we talked to Brampton and the Mayor of Brampton. We went and talked to the Mayor of Oakville. Both of them were very eager to join in. We appointed co-chairs from Brampton and a co-chair from Oakville, as well as the 3 mayors as honorary co-chairs. And then we started to get going. And then about a month ago, at an event, we ran into the Mayor of Caledon. And she said, this is the #1 issue in Caledon. We're going from 50,000 to 500,000 people without highways and without transit. We have a role. We want to join in. And then we were announcing just 2 weeks ago at Peel Regional Council meeting, and they said, this is a great idea, but how come Burlington's not here? Burlington is just as important as Oakville is. And I phoned up the Mayor of Burlington, and he said, I'm glad you called because I was trying to find your number, because I was saying, why didn't you invite me in? And then last week, Milton and Halton Hills joined in, and the 2 chairs joined in. So the idea that the West wants in, that you may have heard because we actually got a really good amount of press in the Globe and Mail, the Star, and the National Post, CBC, Metro Morning, etc., I think resonated with numerous of the different mayors and businesses and residents around the whole Western GTA. The West wants into this conversation. And then I think in addition, a couple of things. People forget, if you actually take Peel and Halton together, we're 1.655 million people. If we were one municipality, which we're not, but if we were one municipality, we'd be the 3rd largest city in Canada. You know, that puts in perspective how big. Mississauga Brampton by itself would be 1.25 million people, would be the 4th largest city in Canada. So that gives you a sense of how big we are, but because we don't have daily media, newspapers, radios, television stations, we just get drowned out by what goes on in Toronto. But in addition, we were of the opinion within our Summit Steering Committee and some of the mayors that we talked about, that the issue of transit needs to be a more broad conversation. Number one, it's got to be a multi-sectoral conversation. Business should have a voice. Residents should have a voice. Labor should have a voice. But too often in the past, they've all had a voice by themselves. They've not tried to come together and see if they can come to one common point of view. And so the idea of the summit in the past has been it's all different parts of society that have come together to see if they can have a common point of view. And then importantly, and I'll talk about this in a minute, we came to the conclusion that there's been too much conversation about how we're going to pay for it. Not enough conversation about why we actually want transit, and what that transit is. And I've made about 30 presentations over the course of the last couple of months trying to build up awareness of this issue and for the summit. And I've been shocked at how the lack of knowledge exists within our community of what the big move is all about. This is going to be the biggest infrastructure development in the history of Ontario, one of the biggest in the history of Canada, and people don't even know how it impacts them. We hear about the downtown relief line because that gets the news, but we don't really know how impactful it is for us in our day-to-day life. So we wanted to ensure that that took place. So we had this summit last Tuesday, and we addressed, are we in economic gridlock, in three major issues. How will we live, how will we move, and how will we thrive in the future? And you know how we move today. This is how we move today. Congestion. We are supposedly one of, some people say the fourth, some people say the worst, most congested cities in North America today. And it's only going to get worse. So we wanted to ask the question, what kind of transit and transportation improvements do we want? And how are we going to pay for it? And why do we want it? And so why? It's interesting when you take a look at other places worldwide. They've really spent a lot of time, frankly, probably as much, if not more time than Metrolinx has spent in the last year talking about how we're going to pay for it, on why you want it. And it's interesting, you know, New York and Toronto have talked about congestion as the #1 issue. But interesting enough, LA had a massive development in transit over the course of the last couple of years, and it was all about stimulus, jobs, jobs, jobs. We haven't talked about how many jobs. Metrolinx just 2 weeks ago, for the first time, said that it's going to be 40,000 jobs. This is going to be the most significant infrastructure development program in the history of Ontario, from an economic cost standpoint, as well as from a job standpoint. London, fascinating to me. They were all about a global financial center. London was losing its stature as congestion led people to move to Zurich and Frankfurt and elsewhere in the continent because people could no longer do business effectively in London. They said, we need a transit to make sure that we keep our global financial center. Well, one of the things that Minister Murray talked about, John Tory talked about, is think about what Toronto could be from an economic development standpoint with and without transit. If we're incredibly congested, people are going to start moving outside of the city. And frankly, from a Mississauga Brampton standpoint, as you may have known, a couple of head offices have left Peel Region and have gone downtown because they can no longer get downtown as efficiently today as they could in the past. So you think about the Greater Toronto Area and what it's going to be with and without transit, that's an important issue that we have to decide whether we want it or not. And then Vancouver, fascinating, was almost like the sort of the Spadina Expressway conversations of a generation ago. It was all about a livable, walkable, mixed-use downtown, a downtown that was like a big village that people could walk around. And they said if you have huge highways and everyone comes by car and you end up having a parking lot, it's not the type of downtown we want. Well, as we know right now, our downtown is dramatically changing because people want to live and work downtown and the condo development's taking place. But not only there. I was surprised last week it was announced that there's 40,000 people living in what's called the Mississauga City Centre. I know for some of you in Brampton, it's hard to think about, frankly, in Mississauga, it's hard to think about Square One as a city centre. But 40,000 people, up from 10,000 people 10 years ago, from 0 people a generation ago. So already that is becoming a nexus of urban living in a suburban environment. And the big move. You know, this is a map of the big move 25 years from now, but it's unbelievable. All-day, two-way, frequent GO train service on all 3 lines that goes through Peel. And people talked about, you know, what's Streetsville going to be like? What's downtown Brampton going to be like? If you can get downtown in 20 to 25 minutes, every 15 minutes. Ken Greenberg stood up and said, what you need to do is you need to have frequent service so often that you don't look at a schedule before you go to the train station. That's when you know you've got the kind of service you need. And he used the example of Manchester, England. Manchester, England was dying from an economic standpoint, old industrial town. And what they did is they put a fast train between London and Manchester. Manchester today is the 2nd largest employer of financial services people in all of Europe. So all the back offices went to Manchester for the cheap space and the transit connection all day, two-way, frequent between Manchester and London. And then he said, but you try to get to Financial Drive at Mississauga Road and 401, where Royal Bank's got their big head office, or the big Bank of Montreal at here, Ontario in the 401. It's impossible to get from downtown to those facilities by way of transit. And if you want to have the kind of economic development and commercial opportunities, that's the kind of development we want. And the Huron-Ontario LRT, I'll come back to that, but people talked about we need the spine that connects this east-west. And we need a 403 BRT and a Dundas BRT, and for Brampton, a Queen Street BRT that add to the GO train east-west connections. But we need that one north-south connection. And then what a lot of people don't realize, I'm not sure if it's as important for you as it is for Mississauga, But the 403 is going to get full interchanges. The 403, at 401 you can only go east, you can't go west. It's going to get the other half of the interchange, and down to QEW it's going to be able to go east, not just west. Because the 403 was built as a bypass.